Okay, we're going to do the naming compounds tutorial packet. This is several pages, including several where it talks about how to do what's being done and why it bonds and the crossing over and all that kind of good stuff that we've been doing. Read through it, and then let's take a look at the counting atoms practice section. Now, the coefficient is that number right there in front. That means it's applies to everything in it. Like, for example, if you're doing a math problem, you've got x plus 3 and then a 4 in front, that 4 applies to everything in parentheses. The coefficient is that 4. In this case, it's a 3, so it's a 3. And then the subscript for magnesium. The subscript is the little number down behind it. That tells me that there are 2 chlorines. So the subscript for chlorine is 2. And then you look at magnesium, there's nothing there. That's an invisible understood 1. So if you don't see a number, you know it's a 1. Okay, let's take a look at number 2. The coefficient, that's the number in front. And as you can see, there's not a number. So it's an invisible understood 1 coefficient. Now, the subscript, that means there's 2 of these, the vanadiums. There are 2 of those. And the subscript for the O is a 5. Now, let's take a look at the backside. Now, remember that 3, the coefficient, applies to the whole thing from there to there. So the number of molecules, there are 3 of all of it. And then there are 3 elements. There's a sodium, a sulfur, and oxygen. Now, there are how many sodiums? There's 2 right there, but there's 3 to all of it. So 3 times 2 gives me 6. Let's take a look at the sulfur. Now there's an invisible coefficient of 1, and then there's 3 of all of it. So 1 times 3 is 3, and then oxygen. Subscript of 4, coefficient of 3, 3 times 4 is 12. And then I don't care about the total number of atoms. You can just cross that out. Now, the 3, the number in front, is the coefficient. Okay, let's look at number 6. The number of molecules. Remember, that's the coefficient in front. That means there's 2 of all of it. So there are 2 molecules. Now, how many elements are there? There are 3. There is zinc. I spelled that wrong. Sulfur and oxygen. Now, zinc. There's a coefficient of 1. 2 times 1 is 2. Sulfur, then a coefficient of 1. 2 times 1 is 2. And then oxygen is a subscript of 4. 2 times 4 is 8. And then I don't care about total number of atoms. Now, the 4 is a subscript. Okay, so let's take a look at this one. The number of molecules, that's the coefficient, which is in front, which is not there, so it is 1. And there are 3 elements. There's potassium, carbon, and oxygen. Now, how many potassiums are there? There's 2. Coefficient of 1 times a subscript of 2 is 2. There's 1 carbon and 3 oxygens. Now, let's take a look at section C. Now, how many Ks are there? 4 times 2 gives me 8. C, 4 times 1 gives me 4. And then O's, 4 times 3 is 12. Let's look at the next one, number 20, K. There's a coefficient of 1 in the front. 1 times 2 is 2 K's, 1 C, and 3 O's. Now, let's jump down to number 23. Now, this one's a little more complicated. This is a subscript outside the parentheses. This subscript right there applies to everything inside the parentheses. So, you'll notice there's no coefficient in front, so there's nothing to multiply. Now, the Ca, the calcium, there's 1 calcium. Now, let's look at the carbon. There's a subscript of 2, and then a subscript of 2 outside the parentheses. 2 times 2 is 4. H, subscript of 3, parentheses, subscript of 2. 3 times 2 is 6. And then finally, O. 2 times 2 is 4. And then let's jump down here to number 26. This is the most complicated one you're going to see. So you've got gallium. You've got a coefficient of 5, subscript of 2. 5 times 2 is 10. Now, let's look at the chromium. You got a subscript of 2, a subscript of 3, and a coefficient of 5. 2 times 3 is 6. 6 times 5 is 30. Now, 7 times 3, when you're doing the oxygen, 7 times 3, and then multiply that times the 5. Which is 105. Now, if you look at this page, this is where it's going to get a little more complicated. You're going to have to think on these. This is working backwards on what we did. It's kind of like doing a Sudoku. It's take what you're given and figure out what's missing. Now, when you take a look at number 3, you see that the subscript of the zinc is invisible understood 1. But you have 3 of them. The only way to get this number in front, what times 1 equals 3? That's going to be a 3 there. Now, let's figure out what goes here. You have a total of 6 potassiums. 3 times what equals 6? That's going to be a 2. And then, same thing with the oxygen. Total of 6. 3 times what equals 6? And that would be a 3. I'm sorry, a 2. Okay. Let's jump down here to number 5. Let's start with the Cu. What times 1 equals 4? That would be a 4. So we know the coefficient in front is going to be a 4. Now, 24 divided by 4. You may want to get a calculator for this one. So we have a total of 24, and then something times that 4 is 6. And then we need a total of this box and this box need to come up to be a 6. And then let's take a look at the H. Got a total of 8. That is an invisible understood 1. 1 times something times 4 equals 8. So 8 divided by 4 is 2. 2 divided by 1 is 2. So let's work backwards on the O's. 24 divided by 4 is 6. 6 divided by 2 is 3. These are more complicated. Try them. If you have questions, shoot me an email.